The reason we are standing down here is because this is an unscheduled little mini talk we'll be giving in the middle of the conference today. Now, I'm not sure if you guys can sympathize with this, but sometimes my students are incredulous when I tell them once upon a time we operated computers with switches. I guess I'm getting old, but what we're doing here in the conference is we're looking forward. We're looking at where the state of technology and science is heading. But I introduced myself at the beginning of this conference. My name is Ahmed Amer. I'm with the Computer Engineering Department here at Santa Clara University. It has been our pleasure to host MassStor for these last 3 iterations. And there's a fact about the university that you might not know. We are, in fact, the oldest operating institute of higher education in California. Those of you who are fans of University of the Pacific, yes, I do know they were founded 2 years before us or so, but they didn't actually start operating till 3 years after they were founded, so technically we were first. Also, you might notice that you are here a part of MassStor. MassStor is in its 33rd iteration. It has been running for over approximately 40 years, if I'm not mistaken. It's one of the longest running storage conferences there are. So you are in one of the oldest campuses in the state. Actually, we've been a campus longer than it's been a state. And you are in one of the longest running conferences dealing with data storage. Now, what we're going to do here today is this was going to be my opportunity to thank Linda Kempster for her wonderful gift of donating this incredible collection to the university. A collection of what, you might ask? Well, a show of hands, has anybody here been the first to circumnavigate the globe solo in a sailboat? Just on the off chance? No? First to swim the channel in the winter alone? No? No? None of that? Well, had anyone done that, you would probably be a member of the Explorers Club. Well, Linda is indeed a member of the Explorers Club. Some people seek glory and are recognized for it. Some people just make a difference and are recognized for the difference they've made. And to tell a little bit about her story, it's my immense pleasure to hand over this part of the mini talk to Linda Kempster and to thank her for her wonderful generosity and the incredible stories she was kind enough to share with me, and some of which she will share with you now. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm going to be live on this microphone. Can you hear me okay? All right. Has anybody in this room heard me speak before over the years? A few people. That's great. There's a country song that says, I was country before country was cool. Well, I was storage before storage was cool. We were on paper. We didn't have PCs. We were going to conferences because we didn't have Google, and Wikipedia did not exist. And at that time, I started getting interested in storage media. I don't know exactly what caught my eye, but it changed my life. I started with view graphs, and then we advanced to 35mm slides, and it wasn't until the last couple of presentations I even made that we used this kind of technology. We were so new back then that we didn't even know how to spell disk. There was an argument, is it D-I-S-C or D-I-S-K? And we decided that the D-I-S-C was for audio and video. And the D-I-S-K, because it was replicating hard disk at the time, was a D-I-S-K. That's how long ago we were. We were long ago enough that I had a friend that was 6'8", Leonard Lobb, and he would say, it's a gigadisk. And I said, I don't care how you pronounce it, it's a gigadisk. So these are some basic things that were going on way back when, before you guys ever got started with some of this. Technology, when I started, had to be simplified. I remember one time, I had 60 slides at one point in time, and I was speaking to librarians, and I was trying to get them to understand how I was going to get a piece of paper onto a piece of media. And they were clueless, because all they knew was about books. And they wanted to understand this, and I explained it. I said, you take a piece of paper, and you take a piece of screen door, like a screen from a door, and lay it on top. And you save the black, and you throw away the white. And that's how we digitize something. We put all the black stuff on the computer, on the media, but we remember where the white stuff was, okay? And they understood that. And then I was trying to explain compression to them, and they didn't understand that. And I said, if you have a cup of coffee, and I don't have a cup of coffee, you want to have a cup of coffee and you want to store it, you store the coffee. We call that freeze-dried coffee. And when you want it back, you put the hot water back in, and you have coffee again. And they understood compression, because that, again, was taking out the white and it's only storing the black. I got through 6 slides of my 60 slides, and those people left so knowledgeable and so excited about what they understood about this new technology, this new digital optical disc technology that I was talking about at the time. And that really taught me that it was important to make examples so that people could understand the relativity of what you were talking about. And before you leave here today, I might even teach you some relativity type of things. The last time I spoke at an IEEE Mass Storage Symposium was in 1986. And you guys weren't talking about exabytes then. We were just barely touching on terabytes and petabytes at the time. But I looked in my book, and I have a copy of, I wrote a book that was all my storage presentation, basically in paper. If you take an exabyte, and 1,000 exabytes is what? What's 1,000 exabytes? No, it's a zettabyte, okay? And 1,000 zettabytes is a yottabyte, and a yottabyte is a trillion bytes. And I had a guy in the Navy, now this is for you guys to know, this might hit this level. A guy in the Navy said when it gets really, really big, it's a brontobyte. So you just store that, because that's going to be something you may eventually run into, is what do we do with all these bytes and what do we call them next? So that was just kind of funny. I heard about optical storage in 1983, because in 1982 I was working at Northrop Corporation, and I was assigned to get all these files out of this room and put them someplace. And so I got all the storage vendors to come to Northrop and tell me about their systems. And it was Kodak, and it was 3M, and it was microfilm. It was microfilm and microfiche, that's what we had at the time. And that wasn't really exciting at the time. But the next year, somebody came from a company called Integrated Automation, and they had just gotten a gigadisk from Saudi Arabia, and it held 1 gigabyte. And it was amazing. It was I mean, you couldn't even explain it. You couldn't even understand it, because we were talking about paper and tons of paper and how much this would actually, actually hold at the time. So it came out, and it was invented. It was used by Integrated Automation, which was here in Berkeley, California. I got to come up and see them in 1984. In 1983, though, still in 83, I went to a company called FileNet, and they were creating the jukebox to hold that 12-inch platter. So I walk in to see this, and here, now this is back before PCs or anything, they had this square box, cardboard box, and they had 2 black lines on it, and that represented a PC with 4 different screens, okay? And they had this little piece of string coming out, and this little serial box, like individual serials, with they drew 3 circles on it, and that was going to be the mouse, okay? And that was going to control this optical disc system and this jukebox. So that's where we were. We were inventing technology that we didn't even know how to use yet, but they were inventing a jukebox for that kind of piece of media. In summer of '84, I went to Kodak up in Rochester. They were creating jukebox for 5 1/4-inch drives. Now, 5 1/4 drives like this, when they came out, they only read them on one side. There was no way of doing it on both sides. So it was cheaper to make a whole bunch of drives and just have a whole bunch of these in there than to figure out how to flip these over or have two-sided drives. So Kodak was very proud of their jukebox that they were going to build for their Kodak information system, and it was a great big cardboard box, and it had all these little black squares on it. So this was the original type of prototype that we were in way back in the 80s, which was just kind of interesting at the time. But they were trying to help me visualize what they were actually trying to do. Optical disc was not accepted very readily. I showed that to my data processing guy at Northrop, and he told me, he said, "You aren't putting my data on that shiny blue thing." He had tape. He had 9-track tape, and that's what he trusted. And it was hard for people to understand where this was going from or going to. In 1981, Sony had a great big meeting, big dinner party. All the managers were there. And they had like a U-shaped table, and Dr. Toshi Doi, one of their head engineers, was late. And he finally made his entrance. He walked in from the back of the room, he had a white lab coat on, went to the front, sat down without saying anything. There was a bowl there, and it had salad in there. And he put every kind of dressing that was on the table in the salad bowl, and then he proceeded to cut it up very, very small with a knife and fork. He was acting completely out of character. And then he reached into the bottom of that salad bowl, he pulled out this little round disc, wiped it off on his white lab coat, put it into a drive, and introduced CD audio to Sony in 1981. It's very cool. Dr. Toshi Doi, you can find him on Wikipedia. He died about 2 or 3 years ago, and I just felt sort of a personal sadness because he was always so part of the creation of CDs. Now, one of the things that was a problem with trying to go from microfilm to a digital storage like the 12-inch optical is that if you had a piece of microfilm, you could hold that up to the light and say, well, this is my document, the fourth one over, third one down, that's my document. But you couldn't take that optical disc and hold it up to the light and say, oh yeah, there's my document right there. But when the CD audio came out, people put it in their player and it played music. And nobody said, oh, I don't see the notes, it's not going to play. So once they understood that the notes were on the CD, then they started to believe that maybe their documents were on either the 12-inch or the 5 1/4-inch disc. And it was the acceptance of the CD-ROM, the CD audio, that I really believe took the whole optical disc system forward. When I moved from I don't want to skip anything here, when I moved back to Washington, D.C., I could actually spell optical disc. And Goddard Space Flight Center hired me in 1980, probably 1986, and I started working there with their storage. And they were having a problem because the market for the market for their tape systems was going down as the NASA budgets was going down because the flight systems and the Apollo missions and all of that stuff was being reduced. So they were looking for a new market. Oh, I got to go back and tell you these other stories too. They were looking for a new market. And so they really got interested in what we were trying to do with optical disc. And I'll get back to that for a second because you have to know about this part. This is a really good part. Dr. Toshi Doi, just to get back to where I was saying, invented this disc. How long was it? How much music did he make it? You know, because he's inventing this. How are you going to determine how much data went on it? He made it just the right length of time to hold the manager of Sony's favorite version of Beethoven's Ninth. And that's why it came out with the minutes that it had. So speaking of music, which is where I was going, this is out of a quote from Stan Kalthoff. This is where music really comes in. In Germany, the BASF invented magnetic tape in 1929. Been around a long time. Telefunken built a magnetic tape recorder called the magnetophone, but Adolf Hitler learned about the development and kept it a state secret. It was Bing Crosby who was shown one of the magnetophones as a war was coming to an end and realized its value. And he invested in Ampex Corporation to commercialize the tape recorder for the US. And that was in Office Systems 1991. So he wanted to record music. The reason he wanted to record music is because he wanted to record his music, get it just perfect, and then when the Philips radio hour came on, he had a perfect recording to play for everybody listening to the radio instead of having to sing, and he could go play golf while the Philips radio station was playing. And it turned out Ampex, who he invested in, was one of the companies that tried to go and take video or put video, live video, on tape. And there was Ampex, Sarnoff Labs, and RCA, and they were having this fight. So The World's Fair was coming up, April 1956, and the guy that finally had the tape with the first video images on it ran across the tarmac. You can imagine this with the security today. Ran across the tarmac and threw it through the window to the pilot of the plane that was flying to New York. They get to New York, they load this little VHS up. It was probably about like this. They loaded that thing up. They put it in a great big theater full of people that had these little teeny TVs around the edge, and they played the first ever video movie off of a recorder. This is 1956, that wasn't long ago. And here it came, and they said, well, what is it? It was a Tom Mix cowboy movie. And somebody in the audience says, well, which one's Tom Mix and which one's the horse? Does that tell you how hard that was to watch? They couldn't even tell the cowboy from the horse, but it was the first time video had ever been seen, had ever been recorded. And what happened from there is that they said, you know, that's such a great market. What if we can record that at home? Hey, VCR, right? The cartridge recorder came out, and you had this big battle between Japan's JVC's VHS and the Sony Betamax. Now, Sony, and I was told this by a Circuit City guy who sold these, Sony, they had the high quality, good quality picture, good quality sound. You put it in, you record it, ta-da, you got a great recording off the TV, watch it anytime you want to, right? That was the big deal. VHS was a little bit more inexpensive, less quality picture, less quality sound, put it in and watch it later. So what happened? The football players on Sunday afternoon would put that Betamax into their Beta and go play golf. Remember Bing Crosby and the golf? Now these football players playing golf, or the football fans playing golf, come back from their golf game, play the movie, and it would stop in the middle of the fourth quarter. Not a good idea. They took the Betas back to the store, bought the VHS, lousier picture, lousier sound, got the whole football game, they didn't care. So that's why the VHS became a more commercial, viable unit than the Sony Betamax. It, of course, is very, oh, hush up. It's very popular in the professional world, but the VHS won out because of the football games and playing golf. So you just never can tell. Anyway, I was getting back to NASA losing funding for their tapes, and they started looking for a new market. And when the 12-inch disc came out, my last presentation I really gave was in 2011, give or take, so I'm not well practiced. But when this came out, these were $1,600. 12 inches, 1 gigabyte, $1,600. You really didn't want to buy two of them to back this one up. So Honeywell saw a real opportunity. They took their VHS tape, they converted to digital, and they were able to put 5 gigabytes on a VHS tape, a VCR tape, that kind of style, and get 5 gigabytes for $35. And in 1990, at an AIM conference in Washington, D.C., which is the Association for Information Image Management, that VCR recorder, which held 600 tapes, you couldn't get down the aisle. So many people were excited about tape that was digital, that you could back up this optical stuff with, that it really changed the market. So Honeywell changed first, and then the other tape vendors changed following that period of time. And that really changed their market. That gave them a market. So now you've got optical coming out, you've got tape starting to replace the optical, and of course the obvious thing is saying, well, now that we've got this optical stuff, let's do the next thing with it. And of course, as the industry is, you have the same volume, now let's make it smaller. Let's put that same 1 gigabyte on something smaller. So out comes the 5¼ inch disc, like I mentioned before. And there was a guy that was trying to explain what was going on inside this optical platter, because nobody really could understand that. And again, it's a matter of trying to make it relevant. And this, Sam Coleman, is for you. There was a guy by the name of O. Olofsson who tried to help the reader visualize the technology behind the optical disc system. And he drew the following comparison between airplanes and optical disc drives. He said the dimensions are so small, now he's talking about this cartridge, are so small and the movements are so quick that they are unimaginable in terms of direct experience. If the whole apparatus were scaled up to a more familiar dimensions, an average optical drive reading a disc would be the equivalent of a Boeing 747 cruising at an altitude of 3 miles, never deviating by more than 12 feet, while accurately following a flight line 16 feet wide at an unvarying speed of 123 million miles an hour. Okay, that's what was going on. That's for you. I think he would win those races, right? 123 million miles an hour. Holy buckets. So that's really amazing. So what happened now is, now that you've got this laser, and when lasers first came out to do the recording, we had another argument. Are you going to create pits or bubbles? Okay, you burn a pit, it might fill up and smooth out. Oh, what if you make a bubble? You make a blister. You know, you hit the laser and it goes like this. Well, over time, that might smooth out. So which way are you going to go? You're going to create a pit or a bubble. And I think, if I recall correctly, they decided on the bubble because the surface density of this circle here that was created by the bubble was more stable than the top of a hole. And so they created that. And that's which way they went with that. So now companies were excited about the laser technology, and then here comes tape. Tape says, well, let's see if we can get back into this game. So ICI Image Data over in Europe created this wonderful optical tape, which in 1986 held 1.012 terabytes in 1986. The drive for this cost $350,000. The tape itself costs $15,000, and it weighs 10 pounds in the morning. At night, by the time you carry it around, it weighs about 15 pounds, but it weighs 10 pounds, and it was a remarkable piece of ingenuity. And what happened with that, there actually ended up being 35 installations of that, and it ended up in numerous synthetic aperture radar facilities, which collected data from space. So it came down at a constant rate. It was filled up on that. And just to let you know, how many people have a terabyte on your PC, right? It's like nothing, right? It's 1 terabyte. You don't think about it being 999,999,999,999 plus 1. You think of it as being 1 terabyte. And so there it is. But to let you know, kind of give you a relative, that replaced 5,560 9-track tapes, which was a big standard. NARA used it for years and might still use it today. It can replace 1,481 of your music CDs, which means you could play 24/7 for 76 days and get barely to the end of that thing. Or you could you would hold 1,500,500-page books. 500-page book is about 1.5 inches wide, and that would take up 125,000 feet of shelf space to hold 1 million books versus the optical tape. And in fact, 1 inch of that tape would hold 28.5 books. So it's interesting. The librarians would just love that stuff, wouldn't they? And one of these document images from here images on here would take up 2,000 file cabinets, which would cover 15,400 square feet and require 100 tons of paper to print from 1,700 trees. And it was an amazing technology when it came out. Now, where we were going to use it in the government, because I was in the government, was at the IRS. The IRS was going to record their document processing system. The IRS was going to record all of our tax reports on a 14-inch optical disc. This is the largest optical disc ever made, and it held 14.74 gigabytes, and that's on both sides. So you had that, and they would put that in a jukebox that held 100 of those platters. So you would record on that and back up on the tape. So you would back up on the tape an entire jukebox of optical platters. And that was exciting. And then the government said, no. And they pulled back the funding, and the project didn't go through. And basically, Kodak never produced, never went any further with the disc. They were actually testing 50 and 75 gigabytes in the lab at the time that they got the call that it wasn't going to go through. The optical tape basically created the last one in 1987, came off the manufacturing, and ICI said no more. But what was being worked at the time by STK and IBM was to put that tape in a 3480 cassette. And as a lot of people know, this is the real workhorse of the tape world. I mean, you can put this in all those great big silos. I have all the pictures. You know more about them than I do. But at that time, it would hold 100 gigabytes. And in 1996, that was a lot in one place, 100 gigabytes. Nothing today, from what I've seen, but it was a lot back then. And so it was interesting that the tape, the optical followed the tape followed the optical. Everything was determined by golf and music, so that was kind of interesting at the time also. Fast forward to today. I wrote this version of my book in April 1997, and somebody was trying to talk about how fast technology was improving. There was a friend of mine by the name of David Miles, and he said the first tape reel he ever saw was the Datamatic 1000. He recalled it weighed 25 pounds, so I'm thinking 2.5 times that. And it was 2 feet in diameter, what's that, like yay, give or take, and 3 inches across, and held 150 kilobytes. Wahoo, right? And so this Dr. Paul Sappho was trying to relate that came out in the 40s or 50s to where we were at the time in 97. And he said that he was talking about the long-term social impact of information technology, and he said, if the automobile industry since 1945 followed information technology trends, today the average family car would cruise 100,000 miles an hour, it would get 500,000 miles of gas, or gallons of gas, it would get 500 miles to the gallon, it would ride more comfortably than a Rolls Royce, and be so inexpensive that when you drove into the city, you'd just leave it at the curb. And that's where he was trying to relate the changes over time. I can't even relate those changes from 97 to 20 years later, where we stand today, and what you're listening to. My first paper that I wrote was published in May of 1987 in a Goddard Mass Storage Symposium book. And at that time, it was so exciting, it was so big, and what you guys were doing was so important. And now I look at the problems that you're solving, and they've just got more zeros behind them. You're still working with some of the laboratories that we worked with at the time. So it's been very interesting. I never had a job doing this. This was my hobby. I did it because I loved it. I got excited about it. I stayed up all kinds of crazy hours. I got home from work, and this is what I worked on. I love traveling around the world talking about it. I spoke in Brazil 5 times, and in fact, my book was translated into Portuguese because they wanted to, at the time I spoke down there, they were only using microfilm. And I came in with this. I was like the Walmart of storage media, and all of a sudden they were going to be able to make choices. And I'll tell you what, all of the CDs were made in Brazil. I went to the factory. They took these plastic beads and they put them in these great big funnels like this, and as they melted, then they came down, they went in front of this fan, and they were blown onto a spinning disc. Where am I getting something close to something? They were blown onto a spinning disc to get it just the right thickness and just the even amount. So all of these little discs, and I'm sure that's where I got this blank one from. Where are you going to get a blank one? I got it from the factory in Brazil. But it was so interesting. Everything was so interesting going on around, and it was a hobby. I did it because what if you were asked by your boss, where do I put all this stuff? And you say, well, I know about A and B, but I come in and I say, I never worked for any of these people. A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Now, where are you going to put your stuff? Here's all the choices. Where's it going in the future? Because the engineers kept me up to date. The engineers and the labs always kept me up to date because I was the one in front of the audience, not selling anything, telling you about all of the different companies, what they could do, the history of where they were, and the future of where they were going as far as the engineer in the labs knew. And so I just had a good time with it. I presented to Admiral Tuttle at the Pentagon, and that was very cool. I presented to the president of SAIC, and he's saying, yeah, stop talking, you're running out of time. And he was the only one that attended the presentation. I think he had so many questions, he didn't want everybody else to know that he had the questions. And he asked a lot of questions. And who knows where that information went. It was very interesting at the time. I presented to the FBI because they had 46 million fingerprint cards that would fill 123 Washington monuments if you stacked them all up. And I had a team with me, and they said, okay, now you show them that media, and we're going to watch their eyes. And if their eyes blink, we'll know that they're interested in that one, because they never say anything at these presentations. And so I started handing this stuff out and told them all my stories and everything. They started laughing and throwing this stuff around, and they were just having a great old time, the FBI was. And these people that were there to watch their eyes and see if they responded to anything, they left the room. We were just having a great time with the FBI and just talking to them and really getting a kick out of that stuff. And like I'd said, I changed the magnetic tape world from analog to digital because I needed to. So I'm a member of the club with John Glenn and Buzz Aldrin and some of those great people. And all I did was set out to help people. But in my wake, I beat Bill Gates in a survey by 14 points on who is most influential in the information technology industry. If I'd set out and somebody told me in 15 years, we want you to be more famous than Bill Gates, I would have quit right then. But you know what? All I wanted to do was help people. And I took a hobby and I helped people, and I did the best I could to represent this crazy industry called storage that I just thought was a lot of fun to talk about. So I leave you with this, and I have to tell you, my little tapes, I wore these little tapes, they held 615 megabytes, and in Brazil they called me, I was the famous Linda Kempster with the little tiny tapes. So my takeaway though is, how many have like 128 gigabytes in your phone? The little chips, right? Sure. Just to translate that, 1 gigabyte is 20,000 documents, 200 pounds of paper, and if you do the math, that 128 gigabytes represents 12.8 tons of paper. 12.8. 128 gigabyte, 12.8 tons. So whatever you have in your phone, that's how many, you could do the math and how many tons of paper that represents. And now you can go tell somebody else something very cool, and they'll go, wow, that's really cool. Thank you for your time. If you want to come over and look at any of this stuff,